My name is David Morimanno. I've been in the cybersecurity space for over 20 years, very heavy bend towards the identity realm. Currently the director of IM technologies at Xalient. I think Mike and I are going to get into some pretty interesting conversations here around machine identities and non-human identities. And on that note, I'll hand it over to Mike to give himself a quick intro.
Excellent. Hey, I'm Mike Rohlfs. I'm super stoked to be here. I'm glad they all invited me to talk on this. I can talk all day, unfortunately. I've been with CyberArk for 9 years and been working in the PAM space, identity space, security space, roughly about 25 years. So I'm an old timer like DJ here. And yeah, let's see where this conversation takes us. It's going to be fun.
Well, yeah, thanks for talking with me, Mike. You know, this is a topic that has gotten a lot more popularity in the last year than I think many other topics within identity. And you know as well as I know, because we've been around for quite some time, this isn't a new topic. Like non-human identities, machine identities, these things have been around since day one, really. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations, for the lack of better terms, have ignored this realm and just kind of let this, kind of flow more from a this needs to exist to keep operations going, and not really looked at it from a security perspective or an identity perspective. And in the last couple of years, that's started to shift some. And I honestly believe, and I'd be interested in your take on this, but I believe one of the biggest reasons that it's now starting to come into the conversation is if we go back like 10 years ago, when really there was this more cloud first strategy starting to come up in the organizations of go to the cloud, cloud first this, cloud first that. Obviously, that was a catalyst for the explosion of the amount of non-human identities in an organization, but it still wasn't in the conversation from a security perspective. It was almost like almost like the aftermath that we're trying to clean up now of that movement. So I'm kind of curious on your take if you've seen something similar. And before you jump in, I was at CyberArk Impact like a week ago, and it was interesting because I believe it was on one of the keynote stages that they talked about that explosion, that amount, and CyberArk has coined it at the moment to be around 80-1 ratio. I think that's a little conservative. I think based on my reading, it's probably closer to 100-1, and it's going to keep growing from there. So yeah, let me hear your take, because I think we're going to get into some interesting back and forth on this one.
Oh yeah, DJ. So I think you hit the time mark right on, about 10 years. I sat around and I waited for digital transformation to come.
Oh okay.
Yeah, we've been talking about it forever, and it just kind of sort of didn't come as quickly as I think as everybody thought. And like yourself, you've been talking about, we didn't call them non-humans back then, but we called them service accounts, right?
Yeah.
And we've been talking about that for years too. Okay. And so all of a sudden it's here, and it's because of cloud native tools, right? Finally, people are using the cloud. They're in the cloud, right? Now all of a sudden that's this, like, it's a new problem. And the reality is we've been talking about it for a very long time. And I think why it was maybe ignored before, and I don't know if you'll agree with this, securing those non-human identities, quite frankly, is hard. Okay. As a PAM practitioner, right, back before it was really called identity security, we always went after that low-hanging fruit, right? The human people, the people we see every day. All the breaches, well, okay, they were with, they got some sort of admin account, right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of a human account in a way, right? Or it's used by humans. But now we're seeing more breaches where they're grabbing these credentials, maybe out of GitHub, right, out of code,
Yeah.
and those type of things. So now it's a problem. And to your point about it being 80-1, I was chuckling because I remember we used to say 45-1, and 10 years ago I was like, I think that's a little low. So yeah, you're spot on with the 100-1 or more.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or it will soon to be more, for sure. I
Yes.
think I was reading a report from the CSA, the Cloud Security Alliance, and they were basically saying that in the typical organization, like it's the number of non-humans is outnumbering humans like a crazy amount, and we're eventually going to get to the point that the total non-human population across organizations is going to be larger than humans on Earth if you combine them all at some point in the future, right? And what's happened though over time is we've gotten hopefully in most cases more intelligible in how we package these things and call these things. And service accounts, if we use that term today, we really are looking at a sliver of all non-human identity populations. And the reality is now we're talking about things like container IDs. We're talking about API keys. We're talking about IoT devices even and devices as an identity. And we're talking about RPA, robotic process automation, and we can just keep piling on different terms and categories. And I think that shows an evolution in a direction that has become a little more complicated to manage, because like you said, and I agree, it is hard to manage them. We did go after the low-hanging fruit, and that was one methodology. But one of the reasons that I think it's hard to manage, not only because it's difficult to containerize and categorize the type of identities, because let's be honest, and I'd be happy if you disagree, because I think we could have a good discussion on it. There's not going to be one method to solve all of these types. Like we're going to need a platform, or we're going to need an approach and a strategy and a methodology that we can put different rules and controls over the different categories and the different types of non-humans. It's not just going to be like you're going to be able to solve all things the way you would solve a PKI cert, for example. Like we're going to have different methodologies. But going back to that complexity piece, honestly, I think the biggest reason why it's complicated is the lack of visibility. And in a recent report that I was reading, 5.7% of organizations feel they have full visibility of their service accounts, not just non-humans in general. If we just go back to traditional service accounts, full visibility of where they are, who owns them, the accountability for them, all the above. Only 5.7% of organizations claim to have full visibility, and that's crazy, because in a very related report, we all know identity is one of the main. If you read the Verizon data breach, the AT&T, you read all these reports, you see very clearly that identities are by far one of the largest vulnerabilities, the largest ways into the organization. I mean, and even CyberArk said it at this last impact, where people aren't breaking in, they're logging in. However, in this report, when it was digesting and going through all the types of breaches, and I wrote this down because I thought it was interesting, 80% of all the identity related breaches were attributed to a compromised non-human identity account, which is a crazy number. If we go back, I don't know, like I said, 10 years ago when things were on premise, and we're talking traditional, and I said traditional in quotes, service accounts, at least they were behind a wall and a perimeter and in some sort of like locked down mode per se. So you think about the world we live in now, and I want to bring this up because if you look at just 2023, what was the statistic that I found reading a couple months ago? Yeah, just listen to this. The OWASP top 10, when we talk about the non-human identity risk, they're saying that secret leakage in 2024 to 23.77 million leaked credentials on GitHub in 2024. And that's a 25% increase over 2023. So not only did we go from this world where everything's behind a perimeter, lock and key, in theory, castle moat mentality, to everything being in the cloud, everything's in the cloud and everything's just literally out there. And we'll dissect some of that, but I'm kind of interested to hear your take on all of that. Like, what and I would be very interested to see from your perspective, how can we combat some of that, right? What are the things we should be doing with some of that stuff?
Yeah, when you make tools that can go out and crawl through GitHub for you, you don't need to be an experienced hacker to do this stuff anymore,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can, download a tool, purchase a tool, heck, hire an organization to do it for you. It's security always suffers at the speed of business. We know that,
Oh
being
yeah.
security practitioners. And the reality is that, to your point about treating them the same or not the same, really, is that they're all doing different things. They're kind of like people in that respect. Okay,
Absolutely.
you can't paint them with one broad stroke. And part of, I don't want to call it laziness, DJ, because it's hard, right? It can be hard, it could be laborious, but I actually need to look at all those identities, these non-human identities, and then I got to categorize them. What are they doing? How much privilege do they need? What do they need access to? What time of day? Can I put policies around that? Okay. So the way to combat that is, and the way we've always combated it here at CyberArk, right, is to have that assume breach mentality. Okay. It's not if, it's just when. So if we can start taking that stance and then treating these non-human identities, and that's the problem. We don't see them, right? We can't walk into our cubes and have coffee with them. So they're out of sight, out of mind. But to your point, that is the biggest attack vector. And so really there needs to be that inspiration to actually, let's kind of start there maybe. Let's go ahead, or at least get it into that phase one. CyberArk, we talk phases all the time. Well, okay, that's not a phase 4 thing anymore. Let's move that up to the front of the line or near the front of the line and start taking care of it now.
Yeah, I think so. I threw that statistic out in a conversation with a couple folks in the industry about that 23.77 million secrets in GitHub, and a few of them spoke up and they're like, well, I don't have as big of a concern because all of my repos and everything, they're all private. And I was just sitting there thinking, so I did a little research, and according to the CSA and a few others, private repos are 8 times more likely to contain secrets than public repos. And I'm thinking that folks aren't really understanding what they're putting credentials and secrets into, or at least the security around these things, right? And it gives us a kind of a false sense of security at some level. We're never going to be able to put proper management around them. Yes, until we solve the visibility problem. But once we solve the visibility problem, we have to look at the processes, the workflows, the containers, the jobs they're doing, the value they add to our organization, and really put that into context before we can just say, and no offense to CyberArk or any other password management tool, if you just take non-human identities and throw them in there and rotate their password, you're going to break stuff. Things are going to break. Things are going to go down. The business is going to get mad at you. It's because we're not putting them on trial. We're not having that conversation about what's the validity of this account? What is it used for? Should we process this a different way? So I don't know. I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you, and you can pick kind of what you want to dive into. But that's my take on the world right now. Is it's clearly a mess, and clearly there are ways that we can start addressing this mess. But organizations kind of have to wake up a little bit and say, yeah, we need to go out and find all these accounts. We need to have better visibility. We need to put these accounts on trial and determine if they are, for the lack of better terms, have they reached the level that they should continue to live on in the organization, or should we deprecate them? And if they're going to live on, what rules are we going to put around them? What controls? So I'll throw it back at you.
So, what we've done here at CyberArk, right, because we are a security company first, right? And I say it like that because we've been around for 26 years. We have security teams that are boots on the ground. Okay. So we kind of understand that attack life cycle. Okay.
Yeah, you guys are in the trenches for sure.
Yeah. And so, we've decided, hey, how about let's not make this so hard. Let's let those developers use those native secret stores. Okay. No code changes. As far as the developer is concerned, they don't know it's being managed. But CyberArk is actually managing that credential that still is living in that native secret store. Okay. And unfortunately, this has to be the key to security, right? If it's not easy, if it's not quick, if it looks a little different, well, I don't want to use it. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So we need to adhere to that, and that helps us keep up with the speed of business. Okay. And then to the other problem you mentioned around just visibility. Okay, I'm going to go way back here. Let's jump in our DeLorean, DJ, and let's go back to the future a little bit here. Okay, we have that same problem was on-prem. Okay, however, it was a little easier to tell. So we have solutions. These are free tools too, right? A little plug there. We offer these free discovery tools at CyberArk. That used to go and show what I used to call the privilege problem, right? And then hopefully you get in front of the right people, and then you show all these accounts, right? Hey, these haven't been managed. Some of them haven't had a password rotation in 4,000 days. And as soon as you showed it to somebody, right, discovered it, light bulbs.
Oh yeah.
Okay, now how do I do that in modern cloud infrastructure? Well, we have a discovery tool that shows that same thing, right? Hey, I'm pulling out this secret. By the way, it hasn't been used for 300 days. Could be a security risk. How about you go ahead and remediate that? And again, these are free tools. So I'm not telling people to go out and, buy a ton of CyberArk. I would love it. But the reality is that, all companies aren't the same size. However, something that I was told early on when I came here is that we want the world to be secure. It sounds really cheesy, but DJ, you could be doing, you're doing business with a company that, well, maybe I do business with. And the last thing is I don't want to see that company get hacked or railroaded or a data breach. So the reality is we want people to have that security head on. And if they don't have the cycles for a solution, right? We have plenty of free tools that you can kind of feed yourself a little bit, right? You can remediate those high risk identities that haven't been used or credentials. So it offers that visibility into the problem. Now we can start talking about how do we want to remediate that problem.
Yeah. So there's a couple things I want to throw in there. So first off, and I'm glad you threw out the kind of the free tools and all of that, because I want to put a little bit of information out there from my perspective as an advisor and as someone who goes into many different organizations and of many different verticals, and I go in very vendor agnostic, because let's be honest, use cases and challenges and requirements, they can vary from one organization to another organization. However, I've learned that a lot of the objectives are very similar. Like a lot of them are trying to go after the same objectives, but the way and the methodology in which they get there is different at times. And we have to kind of mold and shape strategies, right, for different organizations to get there. But there's one thing that I go in an organization and I see people kind of jumping to conclusions too. And I love doing this while I have vendors on the call, because 9 times out of 10, they agree with me. I have had the time where they haven't, and we've had to get into a deep discussion. But when you jump to the conclusion as the CISO or as the leader or as the architect or whoever in that organization, that a tool is simply going to fix your problem, then you're going to fail. And I just want to be clear to anyone who's probably listening to this, is that I honestly believe that when you hear about tools, we should think about tools as tools, right? If you've got a toolbox and for a particular job you need a wrench, and another job you need a hammer, and another job you need a screwdriver, if you've got the expertise to know which tool to use for what kind of job, you're going to be more successful. And the only reason I bring that up is because I think those free tools are awesome, but I also kind of like to look at it from the perspective of setting the blueprint, setting the strategy, getting the direction, getting the visibility out there, And then you're going to need a collection of things to come together to make you successful in building or constructing or solving whatever is required. And before I kind of take that theme and jump into another line of conversation, I want to give you an opportunity to contest that or to combat that if you don't agree, because I think it would be good for people to kind of hear another perspective as well if you don't.
So here's the perspective, and not to be just a yes man and carry DJ's water for him, but you're absolutely right. So before I came to CyberArk, before I started doing solution architect work, I was an implementation engineer for 17 years at another security company. And a lot of times, the engagement was, yeah, we bought this tool or solution, right?
Mm-hmm.
And well, it's been on the shelf collecting dust. The person who purchased it is gone, right? And so you make an excellent point. It's, you hate to say it, you put a saw in my hand, I'm probably going to lose some fingers at first, right? Because I'm I use power tools maybe once a year. Okay. So they need to be put in the hands of experienced practitioners. Okay. Now to the comment I made about shelfware collecting dust, right? We know this here at CyberArk, right? And it really, I talk to partners about this all the time, and you can rebrand this. It's free. Again, we offer it free. Okay, you can download it. Our CyberArk blueprint. Okay, it's going to be that mechanism, because here it is. Okay, Mike, I feverishly bought the software because we had an audit, and well, what do I do next? And so often, DJ, you probably know this, that question doesn't get answered, or it gets forgotten about because we're all busy. It moves on. Okay. So we offer that expertise in our blueprint model that's going to go ahead and take you down that identity security journey, if you want to call it, right? The idea is that we want to go ahead and identify that low-hanging fruit, maybe, right? The biggest bang for the less work. Okay. And then start tackling other items we see within the environment. Maybe we're not that big on the cloud. Okay. So let's go ahead and maybe put that down the road a little bit and start identifying other things that if a bad guy got in, how much could they hurt us? That is it. Okay. So our blueprint model takes our customers down the road to actually getting to a mature identity security posture.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I'm really glad you kind of gave that plug, because I don't know how this is going to get distributed, but we've got to find some way to link that blueprint in there, because it is pretty. It's a really good starting point for sure. This is and I want to make sure everyone's aware. What I did is I went out and I did some research, and I read as much as I could from the NSA, from NIST. I read as much as I could from the CISA. I've read as much as from the CSA. As I got my hands on vendor documentation, and I tried to piece together, because I do non-human advisories, and I go in and I try to piece together what is DJ's 8 recommendations, right, for non-human identities, and I'm kind of curious to hear what you think of these, as well as maybe if there's any of these, maybe we could do a whole series, right, and talk through these, but really, at the end of the day, when I go into organizations and we talk non-human identities, we're hitting the same things we're hitting right now. Where are they? What are they? How do we classify them? How do we secure them? All of these things are very important. And I just want to throw out 8 recommendations. We can dive into these now. We can get into the context of them, or maybe we'll do a series on them. But I'm just going to rapid fire 8 of them out. And then maybe you can just give me your take as I'm spitting it out. But at a very high level, recommendation number 1 I have is we have to achieve comprehensive visibility. To me, that's the starting point. Number 2, we need to enforce least privilege, or the principle of least privilege at least. Number 3, we have to automate lifecycle management. And when I say that, just listen to the statistic. Only 20% of organizations have a formal offboarding or revoking process for API keys. And we didn't really talk about API keys very much yet, but just think about it, only 20% even have a process for it. So that's number 3. Number 4, we need to implement robust authentication mechanisms. And again, this is for non-human identities. And you think about it, think about what we're doing for humans and the layers of challenge and the layers of things we're putting on humans. I'm saying, let's start looking at what's feasible in the non-human realm. And then number 5, and this is the one that I think a lot of organizations struggle with more than anything. And I think it's one of the biggest impacts. And so this is my opinion. This is the biggest impact to the success and the longevity of your program. Number 5, establish clear ownership and accountability. That's one that in every scenario, there's always a breakdown. And when things happen and who owns it and who's accountable for it. And I saw you kind of smirk when I said that. So I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
I feel like I'm on track here. So number 6, integrate non-human identity management and human identity management. And what I mean by this is there's going to be 2 sides of this, like we talked about. We need to treat them kind of what they are, and we need to have proper controls. And not everything that works for a human is going to work for a non-human and back and forth. But we have to have holistic orchestration and management of both realms. And we need to integrate those methodologies, is basically what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And then number 7, this is kind of a no-brainer, but we need to have regular audits and monitoring of non-human identity activities. This is something also that gets forgotten about. We talk about IGA and certificates and auditing and reviews. We do that on humans all the time, but we need to do that on non-humans. We need to have that process, and we need to monitor the activities. And we talk about user behavioral analytics for humans. Where's it at for non-humans? We need the same thing. We're going to come to a day when AI agents, and we're starting to get there, are going to be almost indistinguishable between humans when we look just at the activity. So we need to come up with that. And then finally, number 8, and this is kind of a freebie because I'm like, I want to have an even number. We have to adopt some sort of like industry standard and series of frameworks.
I think number 1 kind of links to another one you had about like maybe a single holistic kind of view.
Yes.
Where we combine them together. Okay, but this kind of goes back to one of the problems, right, of accountability. Who owns it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I called that one out. Yeah. Who owns it? Who's accountable for it?
Yeah. And if people, if we can't find that mechanism, because here it is. This is what I've seen. Maybe you've seen this. Is maybe the security department, right, feels they should own this. Okay. But it comes down to a tug of war. And again, I'm going to pick on my developer buddies. For some reason, they can just turn their back, right?
Yeah.
And ignore those type of things. This is where we need a top-down push, right? We need everyone to get on board, and only people that can do that is the leadership folks. Okay, so we need that kind of buy-in to help drive this. And then least privilege goes back to your comment. I mean, about, categorizing and figuring out what it's being used for. It's just not, okay, it's out there, right? We can't get to least privilege if we don't know what the heck it's doing. Okay. And so that's something that is can be difficult. Okay. We have mechanisms here to go ahead and help with that, tell you what's out there, tell you what access. Heck, DJ, this, there's what, I think it's grown. The number's going to be low, but there's 15,000 permissions in AWS.
It's a few. It's a few.
Just a few. Okay, so the reality is that I don't need to understand them all, but I need to understand what my stuff is doing, what it needs to access. Right? I see it has carte blanche access, but the reality is maybe I'm using only 3 of these permissions. Okay. Let's knock that down. Let's get that to that least privilege model you just talked about. Okay. And what was the last point?
The very last one.
Number, was it 4?
Yeah, that was to implement the authentication mechanisms.
Yeah. Okay, and I'm not going to, I'll spare you, DJ, from my T-Rex impersonation, though I want to do it, because they're not humans. They don't have hands, they don't have arms, or if they do, they have very short arms, like a T-Rex. So we need to come up with a different mechanism how to authenticate them. One way is through attribute-based security. Okay, Lord knows we can put any tags we want, right, in our cloud environments to those secrets, right? Let's go ahead and use those tags. Let's use that as an attribute. Let's use it as a mechanism to dictate who can gain access or use that secret, right? This is going to allow us then to build policy around it, right? If I can build policy around it now by using attribute-based security, now I can go ahead and dictate time of day, who can use it, what can use it, and here it is. Now I'm getting to that least privilege model a little bit, because this is something we didn't talk about, DJ, is a lot of these non-human identities kind of have this always on thing going on. Nothing stops or restricts it, okay? So we can go ahead and maybe restrict when it needs to run, right? It's not a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, 365-day thing, okay? So now I can start building policies around this a little bit, okay? Using attribute-based security and help kind of get to that least privilege model a little bit, so it's not this always on thing. So with that, DJ, I have a question for you. So as this advisory guy, right, who I'm bringing into my organization to give me strategies and architect my security posture, okay, what are you seeing out there that your customers are concerned about?
Awesome. Yeah. So I love how you flipped the script on me there real quick. So, so let me, so this is kind of an aged old answer, but I still see it. And that is when I go into an organization, and to be honest, it doesn't matter if it's healthcare, finance, whatever vertical you want to think of, higher ed. One of the biggest common threads that still exist when I talk with leadership and I talk with these organizations is they still don't know what they don't know. Like when I say, what is their biggest concern? What are the things that keep you up at night? And it's all the unknowns in the organization. It's the shadows of the organization, the things that they're not aware of. And I think it comes back to that whole, we talked about the lack of visibility of non-humans. The reality is let's take it at a bigger perspective from the organization. Look at all the silos of teams that are working and not knowing what the other teams are even doing. Look at all the processes and procedures that exist in a large organization that no one knows who owns them or what would happen if they break or aren't followed. And all this stuff kind of boils up to a very intense conversation with leadership a lot of times. So when I come into an organization, I love to peel back that onion and say, all right, I know we're concerned about non-human identities because it's what's in the ecosphere right now that everyone's talking about. And you should be concerned, but let's also take a step back. Let's take a holistic view of your organization and let's put it into perspective. What in your organization are you today not able to understand or see of what's going on with identities, human or non-human? What are all the doors and windows that have been opened in your perimeter that you're not aware of? Let's talk about what we're trying to accomplish. What's the vision of the organization from a security perspective? I can't count how many times I've gone into an organization and yeah, they have their company mission statement. But when I talked to the security team and I said, what's your vision? What's your mission statement? There isn't one. And I think that's a big miss for leadership. So I go in as an advisor and I try to have that more philosophical question, look at it holistically, and then I bring it into the purview of what's going to add value. Then I build that strategy to say, here's the direction we need to go. When we go in and have these conversations, and we've narrowed it down, just to give you kind of a picture of what that outcome looks like, to give you a picture of what these advisories look like. A lot of times, and Mike, you kind of mentioned about the biggest concerns, and I mentioned about the kind of the lack of visibility or really not knowing what you don't know. That's where we like to start. Once we've done our discovery, we've gone in and figured out those use cases, we figured out those requirements, we figured out those dark corners of the organization and kind of shine light in the shadows. We then turn that around and do a lot of education, right? We want you to be aware of what's going on. And in order to do that, obviously, no matter if it's PKI or it's, managing IoT or it's managing service accounts, functional accounts, containers, name the flavor. It's probably going to be a little bit of all the above. We're going to bring that back to the table. We're going to educate you on what these are, why they are, who they are, and why they matter in particular, and why we should put controls around them. And then we're going to give you a baseline of your current state with that in mind. Really have an actionable current state that says, here's how these service accounts are used within your processes and within your procedures. Here's how these keys and bots are used within your CI/CD pipeline. Here's how these things actually impact your business. Because reality is if you don't take the business into consideration, your strategy is probably going to lack a big piece of what's going to make it successful. So we get this current state, we give you a sense of what's going on, and then we tell you, from the risk vulnerability perspective, like what's now the priority, what is the actionable steps to get you to that new level of maturity. So think about it this way. It's going to be a tailored strategy. It's not this cookie cutter thing. Like we talked about earlier on in the conversation, we can't just treat these all with one big umbrella. So once we've done the discovery, once we've done the education, we did the baselining with the current state, we prioritized everything, we're going to give you an actionable strategy that's tailored to make you as successful as possible. And we're going to be able to pull you across that, whether it's bringing in tools, whether it's bringing in new approaches, whether it's assessing the skill set. Because to be honest, and this, Mike, we're entering a new realm where we might need to upskill some of our personnel to understand non-human identities a little bit better than human identities, like, because that's been the bread and butter of identity for so long, right? Lifecycle management, onboarding, offboarding, ServiceNow requests, like we're familiar with that flow, but we now need to bring in new concepts, new things that are going to be at play. So that tailored strategy on how to enhance things like ABAC, like you mentioned, attribute-based access earlier on in the conversation, PBAC, all these things are going to be in consideration. So at the end of the project, as the end of the effort, that's what you're going to get, is a tailored, actionable, walk through step-by-step strategy on how to mature your organization, regardless of the type of non-human identities that you have. And you're going to be able to sit back and say, this is obtainable, because with the proper education around it, we're going to teach you how to obtain it. And I'm sure you've seen it. You've been around the block a few times. You've seen people come in and do assessments, and it's like, here's the 10 best practices from NIST. Go do those things. And you're like, great. I could have, like, what value is that? I know I need to do those things. Help me do those things. That's why you're here. So that's kind of the big value add to your question about coming in and what people are worried about. It's a huge answer. I know we're going through all of that and going through, what do they care about and what do we build, and here's what you get. But hopefully that kind of fit the bill from what you were asking me to dive into.
That was awesome. No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, so that's kind of it for me. I know we went through quite a bit, but any last parting words there, Mike, or any words of encouragement?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I've heard that same response. I don't know what I don't know. Help me. Okay. So we mentioned some of our free discovery tools. Go check those out at CyberArk, right? Like I said, it's a place to start understanding what you have in your environment, right? So we don't have the I don't know what I don't know so much. Okay, that's important, because you can't start if you don't know what you're going to start with. So I'll provide the team with some links here, possibly some takeaways, and to get you started on our free assessment tools.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for jumping in. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I could have said it better, but starting with visibility, starting with awareness, there's no way you're ever going to get to ownership and accountability without it. So awesome. Well, thank you for spending the time with me today. I'm looking forward to many conversations in this line and a few others.
Loved it, DJ. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.